Welcome to Hello Plant City. I'm Arlie Smoot.
And I'm Adrian Smoot.
Our aim is to create a stronger plant city by learning more about our neighbors in town. We'll talk with people, we'll hear stories, and we'll share ideas from all corners of the community. This episode is produced in partnership with the Plant City Photo Archives and History Center.
I was flying out, and in all directions there was nothing but water. And I had reached my point of my time when I should have been over the little island of Ishima.
You may have heard of Harrison Covington. He's led an incredible life. Born in Plant City, he graduated from Plant City High School in 1942. He began his U.S. Army service in 1943, where he flew a P-47 Thunderbolt. The plane was shot over the seas of Japan and received a basketball-sized puncture. He graduated from UF in 1949 and went on to become an assistant professor of art. In 1961, he moved to Tampa and founded what became USF's College of Fine Arts, where he was the dean. He has too many awards to list. Some of them include the Guggenheim Fellowship Award and the Sloan Foundation grant. His sculptures and art have been in over 30 solo exhibitions, and his work is included in over 40 public collections. Some of those include the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, in New York City, the State Capitol Building of Florida, the International Shriners headquarters in Tampa, and the Tampa International Airport, to name a few.
My name is Harrison Covington, and I'm 96 years old. I feel very fortunate to be still around.
Growing up in Plant City.
My childhood was spent in the Depression, and my father had a lumber mill. One day he went down to make a deposit in the bank, and the bank, they took his money and put it in there and then closed the bank, and he was left with change in his pocket. I mean, nickels and dimes and things. My father was out of work. I mean, not just out of work. He'd lost his business, and he had to scramble to he had one job where he had an old truck, and he would go out and make a deal with Thomas, Bob Thomas, who's his son. Anyway, he made a deal with him where he would go out and would take a couple of men with him, and he'd drive his truck down, and he would go in the swamp and spot certain trees. And they had the privilege of doing this, and drag those logs out, and then they would chop them up into cross ties. I think he charged like 10 or 15 cents a piece to sell them to the railroad. And that's one of the things he did to survive. Well, the way we were able to eat was my mother was a school teacher, and they didn't pay her with money, they paid her with chits and IOUs. There was one little story I used to like to tell was that I wore shirts made out of flour sacks. The company produced those flour sacks with that in mind, that they could be converted into clothing for them. We were one of the people that took advantage of that. I mean, those were rough times, but I have very fond memories.
Going to war.
Just heroic things that you've witnessed, that you've seen, either in war or otherwise.
Going out and getting in one of these planes was in itself a heroic act, believe me, because those are war machines. They weren't to be handled casually, and you had to know what possibly happened to you in the best of times, whether it's you're going out to fight the enemy or just going out for say a training mission. That P-47, you know that story, I guess, where I got shot.
We're going to pause for a minute, and I'm going to share an abridged version of Mr. Covington's incredible war story. These are all from his own writings. On August 11, 1945, Mr. Covington flew a 6-hour mission to Yatsuhira, Japan, from Kadena Air Force Field on the island of Okinawa. He was flying his P-47 and was assigned the element leader in a flight of 4 planes. They were to bomb a bridge in southern Japan. Each plane had a 500-pound bomb under one wing, and under the other it had a tank for extra fuel for the long flight. At the time of the mission, the first atomic bomb had already dropped on Hiroshima. There was heavy overcast that day that prevented them from finding their target immediately. They finally found the target, and as they broke through the clouds, flak became even more intense. The flight leader had found the bridge and dropped their bombs. To get properly aligned to drop his own bomb, he had to pull up and make another dive. Just as he released his bomb, the right wing snapped, as expected, because of the sudden release of the 500-pound bomb. As he started to compensate, there was an explosion, and the plane miraculously righted itself. The plane had been hit somewhere on the left side, the cockpit filled with smoke. He threw open the canopy and started to bail out, but knowing that the folks down there, in his words, were angry at him, he hesitated. Meanwhile, the smoke died down somewhat, so he decided to stay with the plane. His wingman was nowhere in sight, and the flight leader and the flight leader's wingman were also gone. He tried to contact them by radio, but no one could be reached. The engine seemed to be running okay, and the smoke wasn't getting any worse, so he decided he would try to fly for the China Sea. He knew that any rescue effort would have a better chance in the open sea rather than close to shore. With the cockpit open and practically hanging out of it, he was ready to jump at the slightest increase of smoke. He continued to try to establish radio contact and kept going in a direction that he thought would get him to the island of Okinawa. Without navigational help, he had to depend on his memory to establish a course to the island. And one big problem with that process was he had no information on the direction of the wind. He deliberately aimed to the right of the direct line to Okinawa because there were some small islands on that side of Okinawa and nothing but ocean on the other side. After almost 3 hours of flying, he knew he should have reached his destination by then, but still saw nothing but water. He continued to look in all directions, but all he could see was a small cluster of clouds off in the distance. First he ignored them, but then he remembered that clouds often form over islands in the middle of the ocean. So with nowhere else to go, he headed for the clouds. And there, under the clouds, what a beautiful sight, he found Okinawa. Another problem developed. The home field, Kadena, was closed because a plane had crashed on the runway. So he turned left and headed for Aishima. It had a runway, but the runway was almost the full width of the island with cliffs going down to the sea at each end of the strip. There were lots of planes circling to land, so he joined the landing pattern. This is where it gets complicated. Without flaps, he would overshoot the runway. As he pushed the throttle forward to increase the power, the cockpit filled with smoke. He didn't know what to expect, except that the most likely result seemed to be an explosion. Still in the air, as soon as he cleared the end of the runway, he dove the plane down for the water, hoping to be able to ditch the plane before it exploded. This was a very dangerous prospect because his wheels were down and locked and would most likely cause the plane to tumble when it hit the water, and he didn't have enough altitude to bail out. As he throttled back in preparation for ditching, the smoke subsided, so again he stayed in the plane. Hanging out of the cockpit, he flew around the island to a point below the cliff. It didn't seem likely that he'd be able to join the landing pattern, so using the other planes as a guide, he lined up where he thought the runway was and flew in under the landing planes. From water level, he pulled up into the pattern, climbing over the cliff, flew directly in front of a landing P-38. His tires hit the end of the runway with the plane going at a speed of around 120 miles per hour. He made every effort to slow the plane down, but discovered that his brakes were gone. And of course, his flaps weren't working either. He knew that at the end of this relatively short runway, there was another cliff. So he had to make a choice: allow the plane to roll on to a stop or to force a ground loop. If he did the ground loop at too great a speed, the plane could cartwheel, and if he did it too late, he could go off the runway and over the cliff. Another problem arose, which was the fact that it's impossible to see ahead when a P-47 is on the ground due to the size of the plane's nose. He let the plane roll as long as he thought he could, and then ground loop by giving the engine a burst of power and kicking hard left rudder. The blast of air from the propeller against the rudder caused the plane to spin in a screeching turn. As it spun around, he saw the P-38 coming directly at him, and there was nothing he could do. But old 882, as he called the plane, took over and backed off the runway just as the P-38 roared by. He switched off the engine and hopped out onto the wing, later discovering that the plane had a gaping hole in its underbelly, and in addition to other damage had sustained heavy damage on the exhaust system, which was causing the smoke, and to the hydraulic system, thus the lack of flaps and brakes. Mr. Covington ends the story with, "Why this mixture of fluid and heat did not catch on fire and explode, I will never know."
That did occur.
What was going through your head?
Well, the hope that I would make it. So what was going through my mind was the dilemma. What am I going to do? If I ditch here, nobody will know that I'm here and that I have ditched. They won't even know to look for me. So what am I going to do? Sit out there in the water? If I survive the crash landing, wait until I wither away. Stuff like that. You don't have time to think much about anything else.
Are there things in your life prior or characteristics that you think that you have that help in situations like that?
That helped. You know, think of anything. I know that what the plane could do, and what the air sea rescue situation was, and all of that. No, I didn't. That's not the sort of thing that you have previous experience with. You know, this is it. I had never crash landed, never, but we'd always, we had practices for that sort of thing. That was one thing about it. It was so new. Every situation you got into was a new situation.
Do you remember where you were when Pearl Harbor happened?
I was delivering papers. I had a job, Tribune, and they had us come down and take out extras and to sell them. I didn't sell them one. Nobody cared. I mean, they didn't. I don't know why they didn't.
For the edition about Pearl Harbor?
Yeah. Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
I don't know. Once they got the news, they didn't need to have the paper, I guess. And they must not have realized they weren't that worldly. Nobody knew where Pearl Harbor was or what it was implied by that.
Of your achievements that you've had throughout your life, are there any that come to mind that you're most proud of?
Well, I'm rather proud that I've survived the war. I'm proud of the fact that I got to be Dean of the College of Fine Arts. I'm proud of the Guggenheim Scholarship.
A life of art.
I always wanted to go into art. Mother was an artist, and she used to do displays for the stores, window displays.
In Plant City?
Yeah,
Do you remember any of the stores?
Rogers and Middlebrook. I started the art department, and then after a while, I became the dean of the college, which included, of course, the visual arts and music and dance and theater and so forth.
What were some of the challenges that you saw whenever you were starting the college? Because it was early days for USF too, not just the arts department, right?
Yeah, the whole university was getting brand new. Well, one thing kind of sums it up, I think, is that future students would be people who never had seen a work of art. They just knew they wanted to do it. And the extent of their ambition included doing magazine illustrations. The idea of being able to offer people from Plant City a chance for an education was just too great an opportunity to pass up.
Of all of your sculptures and art, do you have a favorite one?
I like some of these sculptures that I've done recently. Aviator, I like the firefighter, and I guess they're my favorite. Dali Museum, the St. Pete people are very proud of its accomplishments now. He was trying to find some, an affiliation with the university and with a certain circumstances for a museum of the God Dali's work that he owned. So he was being turned down right and left. Nobody would take him on. President Jack Brown and I went up to Cleveland and looked into it and to see whether it was a worthy enterprise or not. And I thought it was. I saw their work, and it was a remarkable collection, a unique collection, and very thorough. And but horribly presented. It was in the second floor of it was just in a factory. Anyway, I said, yeah, I think this is well worth our while, and we can have our students working with them and learning, getting professional experience. And Dali was, in the art world, a very controversial artist, and there were a lot of people under the best of circumstances would have turned them down because of that. But anyway, we worked out a deal, and one of the ways they were able to do it was to take money that had been destined for us and used it. But in the long run, I think
It's a worthy sacrifice.
Yeah.
Plant City and life advice.
Who would you say is the most fascinating person from Plant City that most people maybe don't know about?
There were a group of people in Tampa from Plant City who were held rather significant positions. And so there might be some of those, C.B. Knuckles and Farnell, and they got a hold of some of Farnell's activities. They put him in jail. What he was doing was making or having people do work on his ranch for him that were being paid by the county, which he had. He was a county commissioner. And so he had to serve the jail term. And Cook was his assistant. And I don't know whether he was ever accused of anything or not, but he left the country and went to Guam and worked there for a while in their school system. And well, you had some connection to Cook?
No.
Oh, good.
Cook's her grandfather.
No, he's lying.
Andy was going to ask you a few more questions, if that's all right.
Growing up in Plant City and when you were in high school, did you have a favorite place that you?
To the cadet. Do you know of it?
No.
It was a drive-in called the Cadet, and it was over there near the airport where they trained British cadets, and they had the world's best shrimp.
What should I do to live to 96 and beyond? I eat spinach. I exercise once a month. Anything else?
Yeah, well, exercise twice a month.
Oh. Never mind then.
Uh-huh.
Forget it then. It's not worth it. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to share or talk about?
Oh, there's a lot, but
Do you have any advice for me or for anyone that hasn't been married for 70 years yet?
don't argue. Pick the right person. Right person.
What is it that made you know that Jane was the right one?
I just knew. I always had a thing for her, and junior high. She couldn't see me at all. We were friendly, but so we never really got together until I came back from the war.
How did you win her over whenever you came back?
Well, for crooked division means. No, I just pressed my case. I had grown up. I'd grown up more. I was no longer that little boy on the edge of the crowd. Little anecdote I like to tell is there's a guy named Theo Sheevy, which you may have heard. He outweighed me 100 pounds. I mean, he was about 235, and I was 135. And the coach in this drill, where one man would tackle the other man, the tacklee, you just ran out. You didn't dodge. You just ran out there. The other fellow ran and hit you. Well, Theo, I did what I was supposed to do. Theo did what he was supposed to do. He hit me and picked me up, and we landed over there, and with him on top of me. And I thought he had driven one hip bone through the other. I mean, it was something else. Theo, as it happened, moved down here on this lake. And every time I saw him, I'd tell him, well, I said, you're the reason I didn't get to play pro football. Because you banged me up so much in that tackle.
Did you ever challenge him to a tennis match, though?
Well, Theo had some bad luck. He went on to the University of Florida football squad, first string freshman team tackle. He got drafted. They had an accident, a hand grenade accident, and the hand grenade went over here and then rolled back.
Oh.
and he fell on it to keep it from killing anybody. Walk, run the best he could, and he'd do that day after day after day. And he just kept that up until he finally died.
So I really should exercise, is what you're saying.
Well, first get yourself blown up, Bob. Always. I mean, I played tennis until I was 85,
Wow.
and I quit then because some people were dying.
You beat everybody.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, share it with friends. If you have feedback, let us know. We're on Facebook at Hello Plant City. Email us, helloplantcity@gmail.com. Again, huge thank you to Annie Cardenas and everyone at the Plant City Photo Archives and History Center. Learn more incredible Plant City history at plantcityarchives.org or stop in next time you're in downtown Plant City. The music is by the talented local duo, The Birthday Saps. Thanks for listening and have a great week.